Greetings, online students. Welcome to week 3 of Musicianship Online. We're going to kick off this week with lecture 6, which is divided into 2 parts. So let's get rolling. Let's take a look at part 1. First thing you're going to hit this week in Aurelia 3 are some more minor oriented progressions in minor keys. So of course your 1 chord, 4 chord will be minor. We'll always use the harmonic minor to get our 5 chord as a major chord. And don't forget, now there's only a half step in a harmonic minor scale. There's only a half step between scale degree 5 that the 5 chord is built on up to scale degree 6 that the 6 chord is built on, which now of course is a major triad. Let's do a review of diatonic triads in minor keys. We're going to look at A minor, which of course is the relative minor key to C major. Of course, this means that you took all the notes from the C major scale and you decided to change the focal point, move up to the 6th scale degree of the C major scale. You moved up to the 6th scale degree. C, D, E, F, G, A is the 6th scale degree, and you made that the new focal point. In C major, since that 6th chord is minor, the home base, the new tonic that you're calling A minor is your new tonic. Since the chord is minor, the whole key also has a minor flavor. But just remember, the notes of the A minor scale are the notes also used in the C major scale when the focus is C and the C chord and all the other chords that are related to C major as tonic. Now we're taking all the same notes, moving them up to the 6th scale degree, which is now A. We're calling A minor our new tonic and building chords in relation to A minor as the center of attention, the tonic. So now, in a minor key, here's how your triads will lay out. Of course, your 1 chord is a minor. 2 chord is now diminished. 3 chord is major. The 4 chord is minor. If you're using the natural minor scale and you have no raised 7th scale degree in the key of A minor, the 7th scale degree, A, B, C, D, E, F, G is your 7th scale degree. In natural minor, it's supposed to be a G, plain G natural. When you change your minor key to a harmonic minor, you do that by raising that 7th scale degree up a half step. So this G becomes G sharp when you're using harmonic minor scale. At the moment, we're going to look at using the natural minor scale back here at the 5 chord. When I go to the 5th scale degree, A, B, C, D, E, and I form a triad, I get E, G, B because I left the G alone. So if I'm using the natural minor scale, that 5 chord is a minor triad. Let's move on to the 6th chord. Remember, I just pointed out it's only a half step now between the 5th scale degree and the 6th scale degree. Our 6th triad is a major triad now in a minor key. If you're using the natural minor, that G is still natural. So now we have a major triad built on that 7th scale degree, G, B, D, and there's our return to tonic. If you're using the harmonic minor scale, that means you raise this G in both locations up to a G sharp. That means right here, instead of being a minor triad, with that G raised up to a G sharp, your 5 chord becomes major. And this is used very commonly, the harmonic minor scale, making use of the 5 chord being turned into a major quality triad is very common in minor keys. The use of the minor 5 happens as well, quite often, but it's very, very common to have the 5 chord have that leading tone, that raised up 7th scale degree, raised up a half step to become a leading tone, a 7th scale degree leading tone, and change your 5 triad into a major triad. When we go over to the 7 chord here, when we use the natural minor, it was a good old major triad, but if we raise this G up to become a leading tone to G sharp, you've now changed the note you're starting on. You've raised the starting position by a half step. You left the other 2 notes, the B and the D, were left alone. But now the G sharp right there has been lifted up from G to become G sharp. That turns this triad into a diminished triad. So watch out for that. Specifically in the key of A minor, the 1 chord is A minor. The 2 diminished triad is B minor. The 3 chord is a major triad, C major. The 4 chord is a minor triad, D minor. In natural minor, the 5 chord is a minor triad, E minor. If you're using the harmonic minor scale, that 5 triad is now major, E major in this key. The 6 triad remains unchanged. It's a major triad, it's F major in the key of A minor. When we get to our 7 chord, we're using the natural minor scale. That 7 chord is a major triad. If we're using the harmonic minor scale, that 7th scale has been lifted up by a half step to become a leading tone, changing your 7 chord into a 7 diminished triad, and specifically in the key of A minor, it would be G sharp diminished. Students often ask why we don't touch this G right here, and you do not. We do not. Even if we're using these G sharps here, you leave this G alone in natural as a natural, unraised by a half step. You just leave it where it was in the natural form. The reason for this is down here. If you see at the bottom, it says in minor keys, use the raised 7th scale degree to create the major 5 and diminished 7 chords, which carry a dominant function. If you remember back early in the month, we were talking about what function, what job the different triads have. They create a certain emotional response when you use them. They can create tension or resolution. That's what we're talking about. This is a dominant function in these chords, which does create a bit of tension, seeking resolution. When you get to this 3 chord here in a minor key, remember, let's look at the triad as a whole. This triad is C major. The 3 chord is always the relative major to the minor key that you are in. If you mess with this what would be a G sharp, but we don't want it to be in this chord only, that would skew the relationship between A minor and C major, because an A minor chord sounds related to a C major chord. Often in a composition, composers will play around with the relationship between relative major and minor keys. It's not uncommon to have a piece in a minor key that switches to the relative major key, or conversely, a piece in a major key that plays around, switches over to be in the minor key for a little bit. If you play with this chord and put that G into a G sharp, it makes it an augmented triad and completely ruins that relationship. So we don't mess with the 3 chord. There's the reasoning. Now, in your Aurelia work this week, in Aurelia 3, I want you to focus in on the movement of the bass. This always helps you to hear progressions better. We analyze and hear harmony from the bottom up. So you're going to want to listen to your bass lines carefully. Remember, in a minor key, if we're moving from the 5 chord to the 6 chord, it's only a half step. It's only a minor second in the bass. And if we're moving down from the 6 chord, major triad, down to the 5 chord, and we're always going to look at those 5 chords as major, as being from the harmonic minor scale. Again, it's only a half step going down. If you're moving from your 1 chord in a minor key, tonic minor, down to the 6 chord, which is a major triad, that's going to be a major third. And if you're moving from 6 up to 1, it's still going to be a major third. We have a quick look here again at the evaluation elements for rhythm in your upcoming evaluation. We've looked at this in a previous lecture, the 16th note variations in both simple meter and in compound meter. If that's a little hazy for you, I suggest you go back and review that. Is in a previous lecture. But for right now, let's move forward to what's in these evaluations. The breakdown of the rhythms are in a prior lecture, but let's just look right at the rhythms. If we're looking in simple meter, here's all the counting and how it's all worked out. Now you have a chart of this within your resources within the musicianship essential elements for the course. Remember, we count eighth notes 1 and. If I'm tapping a pulse and I have a whole set of eighth notes, it would be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That was just the pulse. I wasn't clapping the rhythm. Now I'll clap the rhythm. Pulse, pulse. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. If I have 16ths, remember we count these 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. These are all the other variations of those. Look through those, review them, make sure you understand them. These were looked at in the breakdown of how to perform these rhythms a little better. Let's go ahead and look at something that I didn't emphasize much in the evaluations because this is a very easy, common rhythm you come across. Dotted quarter to an eighth, and of course, since we have 4 beats a measure, 2 quarters to fill out the measure. You can look at this as though you had an eighth tied to an eighth with an eighth left over because these two are tied together and then these two are tied together. If 2 eighths are tied together, they equal the value of a quarter note right here. But I'm going to hide that dot for just a second. They equal a quarter note. I still have another tied over eighth to account for. Remember, a dot is a changing value. A dot is not a set value. A dot is worth half of whatever it dots. I have 2 eighths equaling a quarter here. Half of a quarter, which is what a dot does, is the remaining eighth. So that dot stands for that remaining eighth. This 1/8 is 50% of 2 eighths, or half of 2 eighths is 1/8. So these rhythms are identical. And of course, these rhythms are, if I start from the beginning, I will count off for myself and do that bottom line, even though both lines are identical. They're written differently, but both lines sound identical. As a matter of fact, I'll do both. Here's the top line. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, and 3, 4. Here's the bottom line. Ready? Here it comes. 1, 2, and 3, 4. That one should be an easy one. Let's move forward to the more complicated ones that we went over earlier in the discussion of looking at all these different figures. Remember, if I tie 2/16, I get an eighth. I have 2/16 left over that are untouched. If I set up a nice pulse for myself, I want to be able to hear the 16th note subdivision regardless of how it's tied together to get different patterns. But if I'm thinking 1, 2, 3, and a 4E, and a 1E, and a 2E, and a 3E, and a 4E, and that's going to help me make sure I understand how many 16ths I should feel. But when these two are tied together, this pattern correctly right here is 3E, and a 4E, and a 1E, and a 2E, and a 3E, and a 4E, and one more time. 1E, and a 2E, and a 3E, and a 4E, and here's the next pattern. Now we've just switched where the tie is now at the back, 2/16. So I have 2/16 left alone, 1E, 2 tied together equals an eighth. So that would be 1E, and a 2E, and a 3E, and a 4E, and a 1E, and a 2E, and a 3E, and a 4E, and a. Remember, each of these lines are identical that are grouped together. They're just written differently. Here's the last one. This one we started a little earlier, the syncopated figure. I have a 16th by itself. 2 16ths tied together is an eighth. I have another 16th left over by itself. So this figure just by itself is 1E, or syncopa, if that helps any. Just that I have a whole chain of them together. So if I'm thinking in my head ahead of time to get the right feel for the 16th notes, 1E, and a 2E, and a 3E, and a 4E, and a here's the pattern, and 3E, and a 4E, and a 1E, a 2E, a 3E, a 4E, So there's a little help there on that. Make sure you practice those. Here's another version of how I can have 16ths in different groupings, different permutations. If I tie the first two together and the second two together, 2 16ths tied is an eighth by itself. And remember, half of 2 eighths is 1/8, so that dot represents the 1/8 left over. If I'm thinking this pattern, if I'm thinking 1E, and a 2E, and a 3E, and a 4E, and a this pattern right here will be 1E, and a 2E, and a 3E, and a 4E, and a 1E, and a 2E, and a 3E, and a 4E, and a. Here it is flipped again. The 16th by itself. I tied these 2 16ths together to equal an eighth. With 1/8 left over, remember 1/8 is half of 2, so that's why the dot works there. That equals the correct rhythmic value right there. So if I'm thinking 16ths again, 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. So there are those patterns. Here's the exercise that you will find in your evaluation. These lines are joined right here, but not in the middle. These blue notes, this staff is clearly smaller, and this is a regular size staff where the black notes are. This small little area up here, I put the note heads in blue deliberately. This extra line up here is called an ossia. It is basically a clarification or a different explanation of how the rhythms below can be performed. There's nothing different between this one and that one. Now keep in mind these would be performed at the same time. If you choose to read the blue line, you read straight across from the beginning. You go to the second line of blue because they're connected, and you're done. If you choose to read the black line, you go straight through from the beginning, reading these rhythms all the way through. When you're done the first line of black, you go to the second line, and you're done. These happen concurrently. Both happen at the same time in time and space. I could read one. I could read the blue. I could have a friend reading the black. We'd do it at the same time. All right? This is just meant to be a little helpful explanation of what's going on down below. The first measure, you see everything is completely identical. Second measure, things change a little. Up top here, I have these two tied together, which means I can look at it this way. I have a 16th by itself, 2 16ths tied equals an 1/8, and then I have a 16th left over. So this figure, that syncopa, or 1E figure, I can read it here and there. It means the same. It comes out the same, it's performed the same. But remember, let me be clear, you read all of the blue notes, boom, and you're done the exercise. Or if you choose to read the black notes, if you find that easier, you read all of the regular black notation to the end, and you're done. And that's the simple meter exercise that's in your evaluation. Let's take a look now at your rhythm elements and compound meter. Again, this is how these are counted. You know this already. This is just sort of a written review. Again, you can find this information in Musicianship Course Essentials and Reference Materials. Of course, when we're in compound meter, that means for every pulse, you can hear sounds divided into 3 equal parts. Here's my pulse, pulse. One lolly, 2 lolly, 1 lolly, 2 lolly. So here's how you count it, of course. There's a variation where the first subdivision has a rest. Here are all the subdivisions we looked through in that previous lecture, and it's just how you would count them. I start here in that previous lecture talking about different permutations with one ta la ta lita. I tie various components together, and you'll see that in the exercise that you need to work through for your evaluation, and end up with different combinations that can be written 2 ways, but they sound identical. Let's move forward and look at those. Review these, make sure you can get through them. So here's our first choice. Remember, I started with 6 16th notes. I tied the first 2 together, and 2 16ths tied equals an 1/8. The other 4 are left untouched. So now if I'm in 6/8, I'm thinking 1 lolly, 2 lolly. If I ignored this tie for just a moment and thought all 16th notes, 1 lolly, 2 lolly, I would have 1 ta la ta lita, 2 ta la ta lita, 1 ta la ta lita, 2 ta la ta lita. When I tie these 2 together, I have 1 la ta lita, 2 la ta lita, 1 la ta lita, 2 la ta lita. Here's the next version. I have my 6 16ths again, but I tied the last 2. So again, if I'm thinking in 16ths, 1 ta la ta lita, 2 ta la ta lita. When I get to this pattern with the tie, either reading this one with the tie or the 2 16ths equal an 1/8, it's identical in sound. It's going to sound like this. 1 ta la ta lita, 2 ta la ta lita, 1 ta la ta li, 2 ta la ta li, 1 ta la ta li, 2 ta la ta li. Let's look at the next option. Now I tied the 2 middle 16ths. Same thing, 2 16ths untouched, 2 16ths equal an 1/8, 2 16ths untouched, and that's the pattern all the way across. This one will sound, if I think if I think 6 16ths just to get the feel right, 1 ta la ta lita, 2 sounds like this. 1 ta la, lita, 2 ta la, lita, 1 ta la, lita, 2 ta la, lita. Next is the whole exercise with the variations in there. You can see that's a plain good old set of 3/8 notes that you're used to, and there's a plain good old set of 6/16 notes. Same way, these 6/16 were laid out to help understand where it came from. 2/16 tied equals an eighth. I got 4/16 left over untouched. These other rhythms you should already be familiar with from earlier in the month. Again, if you're going to read the blue line because you find it easier, you go all the way across the blue line, all the way across the second blue line, and you're done. If you find it easier to read the black notation, the larger, slightly larger black notation, start here. You read straight through, correct rhythms, clap and speak, and count them out loud. Or you go to the second line, and you're done. Be sure to clap and speak your rhythms for your evaluations, and make sure you have a metronome clicking the pulse. That means for the 6/8 exercise, the compound meter exercise, your metronome is clicking 60 BPM minimum. I would suggest 60 BPM because these 16ths can get awfully a lot to say and a lot to clap at once. But make sure you have your metronome clicking correctly. Let's talk about getting out of key. Now, we're not going to talk about getting out of key in the sense of completely changing keys. Completely changing keys is called modulation. We're going to talk about getting out of key in the sense that we're going to borrow some chords from some closely related friendly keys to the one that we're in, just to give a different little bit of a flavor to what we're hearing and creating, composing, producing. In order to get a grip on that, let's review what function is about again. Remember, function means the activity, the natural purpose, the relationship between variables, the working or operation, how something works. And when we talk about harmony, we mean something specific. How do the chords work together? How do they play nicely together? Remember, the important functional harmony chords are your tonic, which is home bass, dominant was a point of high tension, subdominant, whether in major or minor keys. These have the same relationships, the same functions. Subdominant provides tension, but not quite as much as a dominant chord does. Functional harmony, reminding you again, functional harmony is the relationships of how all these chords work together, and all the others in the diatonic setting, how all these chords work together to create perceived sounds or emotions or reactions. Remember, why do you compose music? You want to touch someone. You want them to feel something by hearing your music. By learning to manipulate the functional harmony relationships that create tension or resolution, you can create an emotional reaction, and that's what this is about. So let's take a step for a moment back and look at the harmonized major scale, the diatonic triads of a major key. Once again, I know you know them, but let's take a look. If we're in a major key, the 1 chord, of course, is major. The 2 chord is minor. The 3 chord is minor. The 4 chord is a major triad. The 5 chord is major. The 6 chord is minor. The 7 chord is a diminished chord. These are the harmonized major scale diatonic triads in a major key. Let's take a look at the same thing in a minor scale. What are the diatonic triads in a minor key? Now remember, because you can use a natural minor scale with a low 7, it's called a subtonic 7 when it's not a leading tone, it's a whole step below your return to tonic, an octave higher. So you can use that natural minor scale with that low 7, or you can use a harmonic minor scale, which has a raised 7th scale degree, raised by a half step, turning it into a leading tone, making that leading tone only 1 half step away from your return to tonic at the octave. So let's look at those. Of course, you're in a minor key. Your 1 triad is minor. Your 2, if you remember at the beginning of this lecture, is now a diminished triad. Your 3 triad is a major triad. The 4 is a minor triad. Your 5 triad, because of the either having a low 7 or a leading tone, with a low 7, it's going to be a minor 5 triad. With a leading tone, it's going to be a major 5 triad. Your 6 triad is major. And at the 7 triad, you have options as well. Our 7 triad is major if you have a low 7, no leading tone. If you use the leading tone, the harmonic minor scale, your 7 triad is diminished. So now let's compare major and minor diatonic triads side by side. Now I've written out the major triads in their Roman numeral form, and I've repeated them again for a reason. I've just simply gone up again. 1, 2 is minor, 3 is minor, 4 is major, 5 is major, 6 is minor, and I didn't bother with the 7. But let's compare that with minor diatonic triads side by side. So here comes the minor. Remember, the reason I put this minor 1 chord under the 6th chord of major, because I'm thinking if this were C major and I went up 6 scale degrees to get the minor key that goes with C major, the relative minor, I'd stop at the 6th scale degree, use that triad, and now call it my 1 and make it the new focal point, the new tonic, the new center of attention. So now, compared side by side, my 1 chord is minor, my 2 chord is diminished, no surprise there. My 3 chord in a minor key is major, again, no surprise. My 4 chord is minor, my 5 chord is minor when I'm using the natural minor scale with the low 7. My 6 chord is major, my 7 chord is major in the natural minor scale with the low 7, and of course there's the return to tonic. So, is this a comparison between relative keys or parallel keys? Well, I kind of gave that away when I told you how I got there. Of course, this is relative keys. It's a major, for example, C major, and it's minor, relative minor, A minor. Now let's compare major and minor diatonic triads that are parallel keys, not relative. For example, let's switch over and change to thinking in A major. Now I know that's a bit of a jump for you. We were just in C, which was easy, but let's think in A major. There are 3 sharps: F sharp, C sharp, G sharp. All right? So remember, we're in A major now. Still, since it's formulaic, we know the 1 chord is major, the 2 chord is minor, 3 chord is minor, 2, 3, and 6 are minor, if you want to look at it that. 1, 4, and 5 are major. 7 is always diminished. Even though we're another major key, remember how a major key works is formulaic. Let's compare a parallel minor to that. Well, for an A minor, of course, the 1 chord is minor, the 2 chord is diminished, the 3 chord is major, the 4 chord is minor, the 5 chord in natural minor will be minor, the 6 chord is a major triad, the 7 chord is major, again in the natural minor scale usage. If I put a leading tone in and use a harmonic minor, then my 5 chord becomes a major triad and my 7 chord becomes a diminished. So there are some very interesting differences here when we compare parallel keys, A major and A minor. So let's see how they compare. What is the relationship between the root of the 3 chord in the major key and the root of the major 3 chord when you're in a minor key? Right there. What's the difference? What's the relationship between the root? Now, if you're in A major, the root of this chord is C sharp. The chord is C sharp minor, C sharp, E, G sharp, but the root is C sharp. If I'm in A minor, this is a C major chord, so the root is C. So the difference here is this root is C sharp, this root is C natural. That is 1/2 step lower, right here. This root is 1/2 step lower than that root. What's the relationship between the root of the 6th chord, the minor 6th chord in a major key, and the major 6th chord in a minor key? Well, again, let's look. If we're in A major, this would be F sharp minor triad. The root would be F sharp. In A minor, this would be an F major chord with F as the root. F sharp is the root here. F natural is the root here. Again, this one, the root of this chord, is 1/2 step lower. We have one more question to ask. What is the relationship between the root of the 7 diminished chord in a major key and the major triad 7 chord in a natural minor scale? In a natural minor scale usage when you're in a minor key? Well, if we're in A major, this would be G sharp diminished. If we are in A minor using the natural minor scale, this would be a G major chord, G, B, D, G sharp, B, D. G sharp is the root, G natural is the root. Again, This is 1/2 step lower. The root of this chord is 1/2 step lower than the root of that chord, and that's what I'm asking about, what that relationship is. They are all 1/2 step lower. Hence, when we borrow these chords, we'll be in a major key, and we'll just for a moment say, I think I'll borrow the 3 chord from the parallel minor key, and I know its root is a 1/2 step lower. That's why these chords, and this one, the 6th chord, its root here is a 1/2 step lower than that one. This is a 1/2 step lower than that one. You will then hear the term for these chords as being called a flat 3, a flat 6, or a flat 7. Now, that's in relation to being in a major key and borrowing a chord that naturally exists when compared side by side in parallel keys. Its root naturally exists a 1/2 step lower. That's where these terms flat 3, flat 6, and flat 7 come from. Now I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. I'll play a few examples for you. I want to remind you, if you would like to hear on Spotify some straight ahead musical examples, go to the Essentials for Musicianship under the Concept Supporting Playlists. The last topic under Concept Supporting Playlists is chord progressions with borrowed chords. I'll play some for you now. You can see how they sound, and you can see how they lay out compared when I'm using C major and borrowing from C minor. That's what you'll see in the played examples. Keep in mind that we looked at comparing A major to A minor as parallel keys. So things will change when you're looking at the played examples that you're about to see. If I'm in C major, there are no sharps or flats. Remember, the parallel minor to C major is C minor. C minor is not related to C major at all. It simply starts on the same note. C minor is related to E flat major. Therefore, it has the same key signature that E flat major has of 3 flats: B flat, E flat, A flat. So keep that in mind. Think about that for a minute. Make sure you have it straight. When I'm borrowing from C minor has a key signature of 3 flats. C major, the parallel major, has no sharps or flats. So let's talk about the usage of some of these chords that we've just talked about: the flat 3, the flat 6, the flat 7, and the flat 6 and flat 7 together. When it comes to using the minor 4 as a borrowed chord, it is very frequently preceded by the major 4. Of course, the piece would be in a major key. The progression might get its way to the progression may work its way to the major 4, which is normal in a major key, and then switch it over to the minor 4 just to provide a little color, like this. Here it is in C major. Let's try another progression. So here's another progression, a simple 1, 6, 4, and instead of going anywhere else, I'm going to turn the 4 to a minor 4. Here it is in C. 6 chord, 4 chord, minor 4, I'm going to go back to 1. Now when I do that, that takes up 4 bars, and music so often operates in 4-bar phrases that once I went to the minor 4, I sort of had to go back to the tonic again, just to make a musically sensible phrase. You might see examples where progression goes often up to the 3 chord, then to the regular 4 chord that's major in a major key, and then to the minor 4 like this. That's a usage of the minor 4. And I'll mention at the end in your concept supporting lists within the course are actual song examples. There are links there. You should go and listen to those yourself through the Spotify. That was the minor 4 we looked at. Let's move on and look at the flat 3. Very simple. Let's stay in the key of C, just to keep it easy to follow through. Of course, since how keys work is formulaic, this works in every key. You just have to apply the proper formula to make sure you're using the correct notes of the scale, you form the correct chords of the scale, and then follow through with the correct application of what would be flat 3, what would be minor 4, etc. I'm going to stay in C for the sake of ease. So here I'm going to play a 1 chord. I'm going to go right to flat 3. Now in this case, regular 3 is E minor. But remember, when I compare it to its parallel minor, the 3 chord is going to be based on E flat, and it's going to be a major triad. So compared to C major, taking the chords that are from the parallel minor of C minor, the 3 chord is E flat, and that's the chord I'm borrowing, and the progression will look like this. Here it comes again. 1, flat 3. I'm just going to a 4 chord. Let me change that up a little. Let me go to a 5 chord after the 4 chord. Now, I've tried to stay in root position most of the time for the ease of you being able to see what's going on. Sometimes I throw an inversion because I can't help myself. That is smooth voice leading, which I'm trained to do and should be doing all the time. However, I'm not trying to make it difficult for you to see. I want you to see it easily. However, understand that when I'm just bare clawing around in root position, that is not good voice leading at all. It's not smooth voice leading. But I want you to understand the concept. I'm not very concerned about your smooth voice leading this month. I'd love you to work towards that. I'd love to see that in your skills evaluation videos, but it's not a requirement. You are going to need it down the road as you move through the program, so definitely start thinking about it. But for now, when I demonstrate these, I am using just straight ahead bare claw root position chords. The occasional inversion sneaks through, and hopefully it's enough where you can just catch the occasional inversion. Let's move on and take a look at flat 6. So we're going to be talking about flat 6. Very simply, let's do the same thing. Let's think in the key of C. I'm in C. We all know A minor is the 6th chord. If I compare it to C minor, remember the C minor scale is going to look like this. That's natural minor. So when I get to the 6th scaled degree, the root of that chord is A flat, and it is going to be an A flat major triad. So I'm just going to use that in place of 6 in an artistically appropriate way. I'm going to play along on a song, just playing a C chord, 4 chord, C chord, 1, tonic, 5 chord. Here comes my 4 chord. I'm going to go to flat 6 here. Little splash of flat 6 there. Let's try that again. Let me see if I can make up a different progression. 1, 4, 5. There's another flat 6 version. Let's try this progression. Still fooling around with just basic triads. The 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord. And I'm throwing a flat 6 in periodically so you can hear how colorful and rich it is. I'm not leaving the key of C. I'm just adding color to it. 5 chord. That was a flat 6. Just a couple couple options throwing in a flat 6. Again, in your concept supporting playlists, you will find links to the use of a flat 6. Flat 7, let's talk about flat 7, for example, in the key of C. Here's my C major scale. Remember, I'm comparing it to its parallel minor, which would be C minor, which has 3 flats in it, because its relative major is E flat major. And remember, a relative major and its relative minor have the same key signature. So, of course, C minor is relative to E flat major and has the same key signature of 3 flats. So here's our C minor scale. Again, that's natural minor, still using the same thing. I'm going to the 7 that I'm borrowing from. When I think in C major, where B is natural, this root is a half step lower. And although when we look at it in the key of C minor, that's exactly where the note belongs. We didn't really change anything, but when we look at it in relation to C major, this is lowered. This is where these chords get this sort of misnomer of saying it's a flat 7. You're not flatting anything in the original key you took it from. You took it in its natural state. But when you're in a new key, usually parallel major, it is a half step lower, and hence the name flat 7 or flat 6 or flat 3 came up. So our flat 7 chord, if we're in the key of C major, is going to be a B flat chord. So that's pretty simple. Let's see if we can try some progressions using a flat 7. Straight ahead flat 7, 1 chord. Six, 4, 5, 1, flat 7, 1. Again, go and check the links on that. There's an example in there for you to listen to in a well-known artist's music. Another common thing you will find, that was flat 7 we just listened to. And another thing you will find commonly is the use of flat 6 and flat 7 together. So let's take a look at that. If I'm in the key of C again, and I'm going to borrow from parallel C minor, flat 6 is A flat, flat 7 is B flat major triads. So here we go. I'm just playing 1, 6 chord, 2, 5, 1. I'll go around again. 1, 6, 2 chord, 5 chord. I'm going to go flat 6, flat 7, 1. Go around again so you get the sound in your ear. 1, 6, 2, 5 chord, flat 6, flat 7, 1. Now let's talk briefly about secondary dominant chords. Again, secondary dominant chords are something that will come up later on. I'd like to get you started on thinking about how the concept works. A secondary dominant chord is a dominant chord, usually a dominant 7th quality chord. That means it has 4 components. For example, it's not GBD, it's GBDF. That's the dominant 7th chord that ordinarily occurs in C major. I just want you to be sure that you understand. I'm talking about a dominant 7 chord. It's got 4 components. So a secondary dominant is a dominant, usually a dominant 7 quality chord that itself, it's not diatonic to the key in which it is used. What does it do? It functions. It does the same job just as if it were in the key where it came from, where it originated. Therefore, it can function as the dominant of a diatonic chord other than the tonic. So let me introduce an analogy at this point, a way to help you kind of wrap your head around what a secondary dominant is and how it works. Let's say there's a firefighter who lives in Chicago. Their job, their function as a firefighter It's a husband and wife. The wife's the firefighter. Her job as a firefighter is to fight fires, come to accidents with the jaws of life, pull people out of crushed cars, pull cats out of trees or kittens, right? Husband's a computer analyst, right? Computer IT analyst person. He gets an awesome job in Washington, D.C. He's going to take it. They decide to move. It's great. The two of them pick up. They move their whole life to Washington, D.C., where he has this great new job as an IT computer analyst. She's still a firefighter. She's in a new city, and she gets a great job in the Washington, D.C. Fire Department. What does she do? What's her job? She fights fires. She shows up with the jaws of life to accidents and pulls people out of crushed cars. And she pulls kittens out of trees. But not where she was born and raised. She was born and raised in Chicago. They moved to Washington, D.C. now, but she is doing the exact same job. That's kind of what a secondary dominant does. So what a secondary dominant does is function, just like it was, as if it were in the key where it came from, just like this firefighter is doing. So for example, I can be in the key of C. I can play an A7 chord, A, C sharp, E, G. There is no C sharp in the key of C. It's not diatonic. It doesn't belong there. So where did A7 come from? In other words, it functions just as if it were in the key where it originated, where it was born and raised, like the firefighter, born and raised in Chicago. Where was A7 born and raised? Well, A7 was born and raised in the key of D major. D, E, F sharp, G, A. It's a fifth scale degree. Remember, D major has two sharps, F sharp and C sharp. So when I go to D, E, F sharp, G, A and form an A7, A, C sharp is supposed to be there, A, C sharp, E, G. I can play an A7 even though I'm in the key of C, and it can resolve to where it should have resolved in the key where it was born and raised. It was born and raised in the key of D, and at 5-7 in this key A7 frequently resolves to a D. That's going 5-7 to 1. That's basically what a secondary dominant does. A7 resolving to D even though you're in the key of C. Now, when it resolves to D, it can be either D major or D minor. The point is the root note of the chord it resolves to has to be just like going 5 to 1. In this case, A7 to some D root-based chord. It can be D major or D minor, because if I were in D minor, A7 would still be the 5-7 chord. It's kind of nice if I'm going to be in C major to use a secondary dominant of A7 that then resolves up to a D-based chord that stays D minor, because D minor is diatonic in the key of C. So there you are. What we're saying here, a secondary dominant chord is a dominant, usually a dominant seventh quality chord that itself is not diatonic to the key in which it's used. In my example, A7. It functions, it does its job just as if it were in the key where it originated, which could be either D major or D minor. So an A7 would resolve up to D. Therefore, it can function as the dominant of a diatonic chord other than the tonic. So in this case, since I chose to have it resolve to D minor, A7 resolving to D minor, it acted like a 5-7 chord, and it resolved somewhere other than the tonic because it was a secondary dominant. Now, it can also function as the dominant chord of a non-diatonic triad, but that's a lot more complicated, and you'll worry about that later when you get to more advanced theory topics. Again, there's no really heavy-duty questions or assignments about secondary dominants this month in this course, but I want you to begin to think about what secondary dominants are, because you will need to know as you move forward in your more advanced theory courses. It's coming. So, for example, this is the bang piece that you worked on in one of your evaluations. We're in the key of B flat major. I have two flats here. It's also possible I could have been in G minor. Remember, a major key and its relative minor have the exact same key signature. I'm not going to burden you with that now, but I'll just tell you it is in B flat major. Here are the chords. This is a B flat. Remember, we hear and analyze harmony from the lowest to bottom note up. This lowest note is B flat. I have B flat, D, F, and another B flat. That's a one chord in B flat. It's B flat major. My lowest note here is D. This chord is D, F sharp. Whoops, that doesn't belong in B major. Excuse me, B flat major. There's no F sharp in B flat major. D, F sharp, A, C. Well, D, F sharp, A, C is a secondary dominant chord here. That is a D7 chord, and clearly it does not belong. It is not diatonic in the key of B flat major. So if it is a secondary dominant, it should resolve up as though it were in its home key. So D7 was born and raised in the key of G major. So I can resolve to anything G-based, whether it's major or minor, doesn't matter, because a D7 would be a 5/7 chord in either G major or G minor. So here I have a D with D, F sharp, A, telling me that's a D7 chord. It's going to resolve to a G-based chord, and there it is. That's G, D, G, B, flat. Of course, this is rearranged. That's not in root position, but the G at the bottom makes it root position. This is a G minor chord. Here is F, C, F, A. That is an F chord because the F, it's F chord in root position because the lowest note is an F, even though these notes are rearranged out of root position. This F is what counts. That lowest F puts it in root position. That is a 5 chord in the key of B flat. I forgot to mention that this G minor triad is a 6 chord in the key of B flat major. So I had a secondary dominant that resolved to the 6 chord, diatonic 6 chord of the key we're in. There's our 5 chord. We go back to a 1 chord B flat, D, F, B flat. That again is a 1 chord in B flat. This is E flat and E flat, G, B flat right there. That lowest note is an E flat. Every single chord in this little composition is in root position. That's an E flat chord. That is a 4 chord in this key. There's our F, C, F, A rearranged here, but F is the lowest note. That is a 5 chord in root position, and there's our resolution back to 1, to tonic. When you get to your final playing little piece in evaluation 4, you have a lead sheet that you're going to work through. There's very detailed information telling you exactly what you need to play. What you need to play is to realize these chords correctly and to play them in correct time. Read through the instructions carefully. What I want to point out to you is that we are in compound meter in 6/8. The key we are in is E major. We have 4 sharps, F, C, G, and D sharp. So we are in E major. E major 7 is a diatonic triad. C sharp minor 7 is the 6/7 minor 7 chord. That's diatonic. It's back to 1 major 7 again. F sharp minor 7 is diatonic. It's the 2 minor 7 chord. C sharp minor 7 is diatonic. It's the 6 minor 7 chord. F sharp major, F sharp dominant 7. There's nothing written in between there, so we know that's a dominant 7 quality chord. F sharp dominant 7 chord is spelled F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, E. There is no A sharp in this key signature. This is not diatonic. This is a secondary dominant. F sharp is the 5 chord in a key that's based on B, whether it's B major or B minor. So that means this F sharp 7 chord most likely would resolve to something B based, and there you have it. It resolves to a B7. Now that's the 5/7 chord of the key we're in. But this here, right here, this F sharp 7 chord is not diatonic. It is a dominant 7th quality and resolves up as though it were going to some key of B based chord, a B chord. B root based chord. This is a secondary dominant, and this resolves to the B7, which is the 5/7 of the key we're in, which is E, which this then resolves up to E major 7 back to tonic. This note here, you may or may not, I'm not sure you must play an inversion. If you're playing through your chords, you may come across on a 25-note keyboard a problem where you have to invert, but you may not. So don't worry about that. If you have to invert, just be very careful. Without the melody, you may not have to invert. So don't be concerned unless you can't fit the chord in correctly. You should be able to move around since you are not required to do smooth voice leading for this. Just spell your chords carefully.